Western music spread globally over 5 centuries. Part 1, Music Education. Case study, is the teaching of Asian musics in Singapore a kind of decolonization? This is from my Key Narratives series, which is part of my Global Music History Microlessons. There are many case studies which we can use to illustrate how Western music spread globally over the past 5 centuries. There are examples from the history of music education around the world, and there's the history of music making around the world, including the global spread of Western art music. For example, the arrival of Renaissance polyphony in 16th century Mexico, the global spread of Western modernist music, Western popular music, Western military band music, and Christian missionary music. And one thing to note is that when these Western musics spread around the world, they hybridized with local and traditional musics, and there's a process of transculturation where these musics become changed. These are the resources which I used in preparing this micro lesson, and they can be found in the description for this YouTube video as well. So now to our case study, is the teaching of Asian musics in Singapore a kind of decolonization? Some background information. Singapore was founded as a British colony in 1819. The British left in 1959 when Singapore was politically decolonized. And then in 2019, the Singapore government decided to hold the bicentennial celebration of Thomas Stamford Raffles's founding of Singapore as a British colony 200 years ago. And in 2021, in response to the bicentennial celebration, a piece of important publication in decolonial research was published, and that is a book edited by Alfian and others called Raffles Renounced. So a little bit about the beginnings of colonial music history in Singapore. As mentioned, the British colony was founded in 1819, and very quickly by 1825, there's a record of quadrilles and waltzes being performed in Singapore. In 1828, there's a record of the Native Infantry Band, and in 1830, there's a record of a Rossini overture performed in an arrangement for violin and 2 flutes. And in the same year, a traveling Italian musician offered lessons in violin, piano, voice, and composition. And this is the earliest evidence that I could find on music education in Singapore. As mentioned, in 1959, that's the year of decolonization. In 1965, that's when Singapore separated from Malaysia after a 2-year merger. Also, we should note that since 1819, Asian musics have arrived in Singapore along with laborers from China, Malaysia, Indonesia, and India. Today, Singapore is a Chinese majority country, so there is a sense in which Singapore is a Chinese settler colony. So that is the background in which I'm going to talk about secondary school music education in Singapore from the 1980s onwards. The national exams in Singapore and other subjects in secondary schools are run by the University of Cambridge Local Examinations Syndicate, which is a department of Cambridge University that administers examinations in the UK and internationally. At age 16, students would sit for the ordinary or O levels, and at age 18, they would take the advanced or A levels. In Singapore, there's also what is called the normal or N levels for 16-year-olds, and these are students who would go on to vocational education after they leave secondary school. Music education in the 1980s to 90s. The music elective program was founded in the 80s. This was a 4-year program for select O-level students, and there would at most be 1 or 2 classes of these MEP students. There was also a 2-year MEP program for A-levels students. Schools offering MEP were given generous additional funding from the Ministry of Education on top of the normal funding given to schools. I was an O-levels student in 1992 to 95. I attended a high school that was designated for the cultivation of Chinese culture. In addition to the MEP lessons, I had to attend general music classes that all students in years 7 and 8 had to attend. In those classes, we mainly sang children's songs. And I also attended one Chinese orchestra concert when I was in the 4 years that I was there. I was part of the music elective program, and this was what we studied. We covered Handel's Concerto Grosso in G minor, Opus 6, number 5, Chopin's Preludes, Copland's Rodeo Suite, and as you can see, this was 100% Western music. We were also tested on musicianship, for example, melodic and rhythmic dictation, and we were assessed on performance on Western instruments such as the piano. And how that was done was we would submit our examination results from an independent body known as the the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, which is a UK organization. The royal schools, such as the Royal College of Music and the Royal Academy of Music, together offer music performance examinations for instrumental students around the world, and voice students as well. So the ABRSM results will be submitted for the O-level examination. So later on in 2005 to 9, I was an O-levels and A-levels teacher teaching music, and at the O-levels we covered the following. We studied Prokofiev's Classical Symphony. Students covered Haydn's London Symphony, and they were and these 2 works were studied in detail, and they were also expected to be generally familiar with music from the Baroque to 20th century music. Now, at this point, things have changed. There was the introduction of world musics, including Chinese, Japanese, Indonesian, Indian, Latin American, and African musics. At the A-levels, students had a choice to specialize in different kinds of topics. If they specialized in neoclassicism, they studied works, the following works: Satie's Sonatine Bureaucratic, Hindemith's Kammermusik No. 7, and Stravinsky's Pulcinella Suite. And students had the option to also choose other topics such as Western art song, or 20th century nationalism. Students also studied the following Asian musics: Chinese, Indonesian, and Indian musics. And what is notable here in the A-levels syllabus is that the 3 Asian musics here are Asian musics which could be found in Singapore. Singapore has a Chinese majority population with a Malay minority that is comprised of immigrants from Malaysia and Indonesia, and there is also an Indian minority. So these Asian musics are really musics of Singapore. So that is a smaller range than at the O levels, where students also studied Japanese music, Latin American, and African musics. Now, moving forward to the 2020s, things have changed again. There is now the introduction of jazz and popular music at the O levels, and the introduction of jazz at the A levels. And we can also see that at the O levels, the range of musics have been narrowed down to musics, Asian musics that are found in Singapore, or the Indonesian and the Indonesian gamelan, which is a neighboring country. So in summary, these were the changes that occurred. In the 80s and 90s, the curriculum was 100% Western art music. In the 2000s, there was the addition of world musics at the O levels, but later in 2013, it was reduced to just the Asian musics which could be found in Singapore, that is Chinese, Indonesian, Malay, and Indian musics. Asian musics were introduced at the A levels as well. And now in the 2020s, there's the addition of jazz and popular musics. So one question is the shift away from 100% Western art music a form of decolonization? To ponder that question, we could start by going back to the edited volume called Raffles Renounced. And we can compare that with another publication which was edited by Singapore's ambassador at large and the British High Commissioner to Singapore, titled 200 Years of Singapore and United Kingdom, in which British colonial rule was described as 60% good and 40% bad. So from that, we can see that countering colonization is something that happened even after the British left in 1959. There's the dismantling of colonial forms of knowledge, such as the idea that colonization was 60% good. There is the bicentennial celebration of Raffles. And there is also the dismantling of colonial forms of culture. Cultural colonization persisted into the 1980s and 90s in the 100% Western music education. And decolonization can be seen in the shift from 100% Western art music to now Western jazz, popular, and Asian musics. So this change isn't just a form of tokenism. There were real structural changes to music education. However, it could be said that the O and A levels music exams are overly narrow in focus in a sense, because the only world musics that are represented are the musics that could be found in Singapore. And the jazz and popular music topics focus on the US, while the Western art music topics focus on Europe and the US. So in a sense, the shift has become, if we look at it this way, the shift is from 100% Western art music to music in Singapore and the West. So can there be a more global perspective? Can the study of music in Singapore and the West be balanced with global music history beyond Singapore and the West? What about music history in Singapore, South Africa, Jamaica, and Malta, which are all former British colonies and in which I suspect there are strong parallels both in music education and in music making? In thinking about the dominance of colonial forms, such as Western art music, we could refer to the concept of structure versus agency, which is important in sociology and anthropology. Structure refers to the dominance of colonial forms of knowledge and the continued privileging of colonial art forms. So we see that in the popularity of the ABRSM piano exams in Singapore. And within this structure, agency is seen when global peoples shape music education and music making in Singapore, South Africa, Jamaica, and Malta. And the music that they create include a wide range from modernist, tonal, popular, and jazz music to traditional musics. So, in conclusion, decolonization is different in the Americas, which were never politically decolonized in the same way as in Southeast Asia. But decolonization in Southeast Asia remains incomplete and continues today. For example, we could move beyond Singapore and the West in music education. In 20th century music making, Singaporean and other Southeast Asian or global composers in the Western modernist or tonal vein, or in popular and jazz music circles, exercise their agency towards their own social purposes and form a network that tells a fuller story than Schoenberg, Stravinsky, John Cage, that is 100% Western composers. The case of music education in Singapore since the 1980s is a part of the history in which Western music spread globally over the past 5 centuries. We might conclude with some thoughts about what was emphasized by the decolonial theorists Eve Tuck and Wayne Young, who said that what is colonization must be answered specifically. So, Western music is a colonial art form, and in the shift away from 100% Western music education, we see a form of decolonization. However, there are other aspects of the changes to the music syllabus which are not decolonial. So, for example, there was a shift at the O levels from melodic and rhythmic dictation in the 90s to empowering students to compose melodies and 2-part keyboard exercises and songs in the notes. And today, students compose their own original music. This kind of empowerment is generalized, and it is not dismantling a specific colonial history. Also, student-centered pedagogy is good, but it is not dismantling a specific colonial history. And for readers and viewers who are interested, there is a broad range of decolonial theory from different geographies. There are decolonial theorists in North America, Latin America, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. So these are some references that are worth checking out. And that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you for watching.